Hey, have you ever seen the movie The Sixth Sense? Remember that movie, The Sixth Sense? It has Bruce Willis in it. Uh, Bruce Willis, incidentally, has been in the news quite a bit. The news about him is that his health and his brain functioning has a diagnosis that means it's going to deteriorate. Have you heard this about Bruce Willis? And can you think of some of his iconic roles? Die Hard, probably. The Sixth Sense, to me, is one of his iconic roles. Bruce Willis is in this movie called The Sixth Sense, and he's dead. The little boy, Haley Joel Osment, is going to a therapist, and he's going there because he has some weird thoughts, and the therapist is Bruce Willis, Dr. Malcolm Crowe, and Dr. Crowe is dead. Haley Joel Osment sees dead people, and Bruce Willis is dead. And actually, the kid is helping him, not him helping the kid. If you haven't seen that movie, I just spoiled it for you, right? But I mean, let's face it, this is like a 25-year-old movie, and if you haven't seen it, if you haven't seen it by now, were you really ever going to see it? Also, Soylent Green is people. The planet of the apes is really Earth after our ruining of it. Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. I'm sorry to spoil that for you. Also, weirdly enough, because they kiss and have like this sort of earlier tension, Leia and Luke are actually brother and sister, which is weird. Sometimes the way that story is told. Rosebud is the sled. The thing that he keeps talking about when he says Rosebud is the sled. And I hope I'm not really ruining these stories for you. When I first got to know Kate, she liked the television show Friends, and this has had a resurgence. We just made a Lego Friends set at home. Ross and Rachel end up together. Sorry, I did not say spoiler alert. In the most recent Spider-Man, to be released through Marvel, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland are in it. All the Spider-Mans from all the times and all the places are in this Spider-Man. I hope I didn't spoil that for you. But I want you to think about that. Spoilers. What is it like for us to know that Easter Sunday is the story of Jesus' resurrection? This is like the sort of worst spoiler of all time. We hear all the stories of Jesus' death and the stories of his trial before his death, his being arrested. We hear all those stories, and we already know what's going to happen. We already know he's going to resurrect. So, spoiler, right? That's the worst kept spoiler of all time. But in the next few minutes, I want to think about trying to be honest with ourselves instead of racing ahead to the spoiler. I want to talk to you about being honest with what we're actually hopeful that God does for us instead of racing to the spoiler of it, okay? So, good morning, good afternoon. This is preparing for Holy Week, not preparing for Sunday, but preparing for Holy Week. This is a special edition of the Preparing for Sunday Bible Study podcast series that I've been trying to offer for you. And this week we are preparing for Holy Week, the whole week, not just Easter Sunday. And that's why I don't want to just race to the spoiler. I want to think about what the whole time means for us. A note, hopefully quick, if I can do this quickly, a note about the texts for this week, about the gospel texts. Maundy Thursday, we will observe it beginning at 6:30 in the fellowship hall at St. Stephen. We have a supper planned, and then at 7 there will be a sort of informal communion liturgy that's meant to feel kind of like the upper room. This is because on Maundy Thursday we observe the Passover like Jesus did with his disciples, and the text for that day is always John 13, 1 through 17. That's the standard of all 3 years, John 13, 1 through 17. The Good Friday text for this season is John 18:1 through 19:42. I'm not going to read all that. It's the story of Jesus' trial and interaction with Pilate and all the religious leaders and his ultimate death as it's told by John. So Easter, the gospel text that we'll use here is John 20:1 through 18. Yes, we are in the year of Luke. All 3 years give the option of reading the John 20 text. And really, I could have read the Luke text of the resurrection story. Sorry if when I say resurrection, I'm spoiling it, but that's what's going to happen here. We read on Palm and Passion Sunday the triumphal entry in Luke outside before we processed in. And then in the worship service, we heard the Passion story from Luke. And I could have kept that. We could have had the resurrection story from Luke. That would have been its own type of continuity. I'm actually going to look for continuity this week together as a whole story. So Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter all have readings from John. I could have been jumping all over the place if I didn't. And so we're kind of going to stick with readings from John. And this preparing for Holy Week isn't really going to take a closer look at any of those texts. You'd have to read these for yourself. John 13:1 through 17 is Maundy, Thursday. John 18:1 through 19:42 is Good Friday. And Easter will be John 20:1 through 18. Spoiler, Jesus resurrects. But I don't want to think just about that, okay? There's a sort of partially true story, partially apocryphal at this point story of Martin Luther way back in the year 1526. And he went in that year with a whole group of the reformers to visit churches that felt like they no longer wanted to be Roman Catholic but decided to be Lutheran or Reform, part of the Reformation instead. And when he visited them, Luther was, it's told, appalled at the state of the churches that he visited. He felt like the pastors nor the people who attended church there knew anything about the story. To some degree, that might be true even to today. I don't know how well we know the story. We're challenged to race ahead to the spoiler of the resurrection, and that, I think, removes a lot of the beauty of the process of Holy Week. And what I would like for you to do is to enter into Holy Week as a walk for what it is, not to race ahead to the spoiler of the resurrection, but to hear the whole story and value the whole story. And in the next few minutes, that's what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm not going to go over all these scripture verses from John, though you could easily read them yourself. Instead, I'm going to kind of talk to you about how a Lutheran pastor, how I, as a Lutheran pastor, am going to approach Holy Week. And it's rooted back into Luther's being appalled at people's racing to the spoiler and sort of living the way they did and maybe not knowing the whole story. Luther ended up writing the small catechism, which we've read through during the season of Lent, as a guide to the totality of what it means to be people of faith. And partly what Luther did in rewriting this catechism, this guidebook for the church, is tell us that there are two sacraments, baptism and communion. Those are the two sacraments instead of all the sacraments that there were. But Luther also wanted to make it be clear that the Ten Commandments, the Creed, the Lord's Prayer, should also be known in churches, that we should know the whole story. Luther's way of framing that is that we should hear the law. That's the Ten Commandments. So he put that first in the small catechism, and then we move to the Creed and the Lord's Prayer, the spoilers of what God gives us. That you can't understand what God gives us without knowing the demand of the Ten Commandments first. So without living into and hearing the demand of Holy Week, we don't really understand the point of the spoiler fully. All right? I'll take a momentary aside. It's still historical, but I'm bumping way further up in history. I'm giving this as a bit of an aside. People talk to me or mention to me often about our founding fathers in the United States, and that they were godly men, they were Christian men. My sense of the historical accuracy of that is that they may very well have been godly men and women, but that they probably weren't really very devout Christians. There's a whole trend now to try to capture our founding mothers, our founding fathers, as these very devout Christians. But the truth is that they were deceptively not Christian. They were godly, but they certainly weren't Lutheran, and they definitely weren't Christian to me. They had what I think a lot of people today have. They had a sort of moralistic, therapeutic deism. Deism was a very common belief in the age of our founding, and the age of our founding mothers and fathers, and it looks a lot like Christianity, but it's dangerously different, okay? So deism is the belief that God is removed, that God is off somewhere else, that God created, that God set everything in motion, and then has no real active involvement in the world. Our founding mothers and fathers thought that they had to take on, if they wanted things fixed, they needed to do it, because God is removed. But they saw God as moralistic, gives us some, by setting creation in order, gives us some guide of what's normalized, what's moral behavior, and we should, when we can, try to live that way. God and the story of God's love can be therapeutic. It can be like, oh, I feel better now when we hear it. This is moralistic, therapeutic deism. And, when I look out now as a Lutheran, not in 1526, but, almost 500 years later, the churches can be in sort of the same position that it was in when Luther surveyed it. We don't know the whole story. We like the spoiler. I mean, Dr. Malcolm Crowe is dead the whole movie. If I've spoiled that for you, sorry. But we know that Jesus is resurrected. We like that. But how much does it really mean in our lives? What does this mean for us? We like moralistic, therapeutic deism, that God's out there, is good to know. When we need God, maybe we can call out to God. Maybe, God gives us a little bit of idea how to live, and maybe that'll be helpful. And God will offer us a sort of therapeutic presence when we need it. But this is not Lutheran. This is not what our founding fathers really should have been, in my estimation, about. They weren't really Christians. Really, Lutheranism and Holy Week are something else entirely. And what we're going to need to do is take a breath and stop trying to race to the spoiler. And we're going to have to stop viewing God as just something that gives us a moral idea of how to live, offers us therapy, and then is off all out there somewhere. Really, God is a scary presence right in our midst. And you and I deserve to be judged for our sinfulness. I never shy away with you all painting myself as a broken, fallen person, and that is 100% true. I have bad habits. I speak badly of people when I shouldn't. I behave in a way that I shouldn't. Sometimes my sinfulness costs me at St. Stephen. People get upset with me. People often aren't patient with my own sinfulness, but I've never hidden it from you. I am a broken person, and I cannot just live moralistically and be okay. God is not just going to offer me a little bit of a smile and some therapy and fix it. God breaks into my life, and that is scary because God offers something like the Ten Commandments, which judge me, which tell me that I'm sinful and I am not up to par. There's no racing ahead to the spoiler here. There's living in the confusion of the story itself. And that's where we're at with Holy Week. Whereas I need to look at my own sinfulness, Holy Week asks you to look at yours. And that's what the process of going through John 13, John 18 and 19, and John 20 is really about. God is more than a moralistic, therapeutic, deistic God. In that philosophy, there is no awe. There is no scared in the transcendent, connected life of God in our midst. There is no horror at the effects and the reality of my sin and your sin. There is no acknowledging of brokenness, and there is no hope that God can have any plan that would ever fix brokenness. In moralistic therapeutic deism, we pretend like there isn't any brokenness. It's like Thomas Jefferson. We pretend like he wasn't a slave owner and wasn't doing all sorts of things on the side with all of his female slaves. We just brush past that and make him sound like he's this great guy. But in reality, he's both. And it's having sat in my sinfulness and thought about it, thought about how badly I often fall short, and basically moment to moment fall short, that I understand why resurrection is so important. The story of Luther seeing the churches that were not as understanding of who they were and who God was is our story. The story of racing ahead to the spoiler instead of living in the confusion of the moment is our story. That's what it's like to watch a movie with Kate and my boys, by the way. Why are they doing this? What could be happening? It's question after question after question. When in reality, a movie's supposed to build, it's supposed to make you feel those questions because it's going to offer you a resolution to those. If we race ahead to the resolution of the resurrection, we miss the finger pointing at sinfulness. I think our world races to that too quickly. I mean, we're really good at the pointing fingers at other people. We like that. You should moralistically live this way. You should do this and you don't. But we forget those three fingers that point back at us. Really, it starts with our own sinfulness. And then comes the acknowledgement that Christ wears death to trample death. That Christ wears sinfulness to move us past our sinfulness. The spoiler isn't any good when we race ahead to the spoiler. Instead, you and I sit in Holy Week. We hear the commandment on Monday, Thursday of how we are supposed to serve not just the people that we like, but the people that we don't. That we are supposed to be humble and we're not. That we're supposed to be filled with love of others and we're not. And that's part of the story of Maundy Thursday, and this should petrify us. The cost of that is death. The cost of my sinfulness is before God being pronounced worthy of death. I deserve to be judged by God as you do, and that's what we hear on Good Friday. The cost of my life, of the mistakes I've made, are my own death. You can't get to the resurrection of Easter without sitting in that. So, once you've moved through the whole cycle, you get to hear that God does not hold our sinfulness against us. God is fully aware of it, and we should be aware of it. We should be cognizant and thoughtful about it. There's no moralistic, therapeutic thing. There's a God who looks at us and we know should be really mad and decides to be mad, but also to not let that be the full story, that God is going to put on death to trample death. And that's not always what we think the story should look like, but that's what it is. So on Easter, I hope to actually, I don't know if I can pull this off, I'm working on it, to try to tell you 5 different resurrection stories from the Bible. 5 different resurrection stories. There's only 4 Gospels. I'm going to add a 5th, and I'm going to ask you to think about why they're unique and why they're different and who that makes us. I'm going to try to do that in the sermon on Easter Sunday. That's a bit of a tease. I'm going to try to cover how something unique to each gospel story, okay? And that's Sunday. We know that the ultimate way that all 5 of those stories end, and yes, I'm saying 5 even though there's only 4 gospels, you'll have to find out why I'm saying that. All of those tell us about the resurrection. But the resurrection isn't just so that we feel, the resurrection. The resurrection is literally meant to embrace our death, to tell us that we have deserved, we have our own death to think about, and that right when we feel our most helpless, right when we say we give up and we give all of our faith to God to handle things, is when we are truly resurrected. Now, that's a lot to ask you to believe, but that is the account of Holy Week. Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's dad, Malcolm Crowe is dead, Soylent Green is people, Planet of the Apes is Earth, Ross and Rachel get back together, Rosebud is the sled, Spider-Man has all the Spider-Mans in it, and the resurrection is how this story is going to end. But don't race to that. Please consider your own sinfulness. Please don't just want to point the finger, but also have the finger pointed at you. Consider the 10 Commandments and where you don't follow them. Acknowledge that because we don't follow them, we are broken, our world is broken, and God is in this world, and it knows how broken it is. God knows how broken I am. But that's okay, because God asks us to not put our faith in ourselves, but to put it in God, God's self. That is the story of Holy Week, and I hope having thought about this for a little while helps you enter into it, to allow the Holy Spirit to do the work to you that is necessary. I know that this is the worst spoiled story of all time, but let's not race there just yet. Let's sit together, broken person that I am, sinful person that you are, and let's acknowledge our sinfulness together, and let's together hand over our hope, hand over our faith, hand over our dreams and expectations to God. And maybe in doing so, the resurrection that we've really been waiting for the last couple of years could fully be upon us. Don't race ahead, but feel free to enjoy Holy Week for what it is. God has this and God has you. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that you join me for these. I hope that you stay safe, and I hope to see you soon.